include the prosecution side of that. That is done, they get public information requests all the time for those cases, and we adhere to those. But typically, what we do is we hand those cases that are completed back to the requesting agency. And the reason that we do it in that fashion is to allow that agency to make the appropriate responses to the public after they have read that document. The public information request for that document typically goes to that agency at that point in time. So it absolutely is public domain. It's just at a point in time that it becomes that, ma'am.
Madam Chair, Director Holliday, then the question about when the report would be expected does become relevant. Do you have a date in mind when the public might learn what it is you found?
Madam Chair, Senator McKeon, I do not at this point. It would absolutely be speculation, ma'am, as to when it will be done. As I indicated previously, when you start down the path of investigation, it's not uncommon for when you talk to people or when you review data that more questions come up, more people come up, more people that you need to talk to, maybe a furtherance of the data collection that you have, or in this situation, emails that you want to look at. So for me to suggest that there would be an end date for this investigation would be absolutely inappropriate, ma'am.
Madam Chair, Director.
Representative.
One more question. So are you examining then the conduct of the employees who've handled these cases? Is that essentially what you're looking at as to how it was handled internally?
Madam Chair, Senator McKeon, the process that we're looking at is an administrative one. We're looking at not only the data, emails, but as well as kind of the who, what, and where, as we do in any investigation, as in terms of people. So there are certain people that are coming into our purview of questioning and asking for emails and specific data. Yes, ma'am.
Senator Landrum Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the Director, just following up a little bit on the questions that Representative McKeon Davis was discussing. I understand that it's very difficult right now to give a concrete date of when the investigation will be done. I get that because it takes time for that to happen. But part of the investigation is also to make sure that we have the right information to solve the second question of the hour, and that is for this to never, ever occur again. With that being the case, once it's distributed over to the department, then is there some type of a deadline of when the department needs to disseminate this out to the public so we can know what has occurred?
Madam Chair, Senator Landrum Taylor, the release of that information is really decided upon by the agency head, not by me or our agency. That information is released through them at their discretion.
Director Carter, do you want to further clarify?
Yes, Madam Co-Chairs and members of the committee. Although this information, the information that will be contained in this report, would certainly be immediately available upon a public request, I will assert to this committee that within 24 hours of my receipt of the report, I will make it available to this committee.
Thank you.
In the form in which it was presented to us.
Mr. Jacober.
Quick question. Can you define the scope of exactly where you're investigating so we can kind of get our arms around at what stage and what end? CPS is a huge agency and there's a ton of things that happen in there. So it'd be helpful to know exactly, where the scope is. And then can you just give us an outline of what the outcome is going to be? What's it going to, how is it going to be presented? Is it with action items? Is it purely just a summary of your findings? Or is there going to be recommendations? What comes in as part of that?
Madam Chair, sir, the investigation will be presented in a format that is a protocol for within our agency. There are not going to be any recommendations at all. What there will be is basically an entirety of the investigation, the people that were interviewed, the dates, the data, all that will be listed in that investigation. With regard to how it's released, that again falls back to the director. But that we have a definite protocol that we have established that in every investigation is followed. So every bit of the investigation, as I said, not to say it again, but all the people that we talk to, the data that we look at, all of that will be in the investigation. As for recommendations, we don't do that. That is strictly up to the reviewer and others to make a determination of how that will affect that agency and what is done with it.
And then the scope, where does it start? Where does it end?
The scope for us, sir, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, sir, the scope really is an administrative one. I'm sorry, I can't remember your name.
Mr.
Joe.
Jacober.
That's even worse. The scope is an administrative one. And what we're looking at is the policies and procedures of the agency. And then as to what actually happened and how those policies and procedures match up with the actions that we're basically investigating, that we're finding out through interviews, through the data, through the emails.
So it's purely the investigation part of the 6,000 cases. Is that what you're saying? It's just that little part?
No, sir, it's not of the 6,000 cases. It's the policies and procedures and how these 6,000 got categorized into the areas that they were put into. And more, I guess, and to some degree, the people that put them there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any further questions? Mr. Chafee?
Director Halliday, can you tell us how many people you have assigned to this investigation? And secondly, as you mentioned, things unfold. And have you had to, at the beginning, assign so many and then found that the scope of things has moved and you've had to assign others?
Madam Chair, Mr. Chafee, absolutely. At the initial part of this, when we started, there were 5 people. But as we get into data, emails, we're at the point now where we'll bring on an analyst to start really kind of looking at the data and making sense of it, putting it in a format that's easily understood. So at this point, and then you have the review process that comes all the way up through me in terms of briefing. So we've got 3 investigators, 1 sergeant. Past that, then there's a captain that looks at all that document. And then from there, it comes to the Criminal Investigations Division Head, Lieutenant Colonel Chung, and then to my desk, again, in a briefing form. What's going to happen at this point is now we have 1 analyst that we're bringing on board, as I said, that will look at that. So whatever that number is, I think 6 or 7 now. And it could expand, sir.
Thank you, Director Holliday. I think you can gather from the line of questioning that stayed specific to your process that there is certainly a need for an accurate, thorough investigation, but also an expeditious one. So I'm hopeful that will be the case, because I think we all want to know what happened.
Madam Chair, I appreciate your concerns. I'd stake my reputation on it to be factual and unbiased, and we'll get it done as expediently as a thorough investigation will allow us to, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your coming today, and now
Thank you.
would like an update from the CARE team, Child Advocate Response Examination Team, and I'd like to invite up the chairman of that team, Charles Flanagan.
Thank you, Madam Chairs, members. My name is Charles Flanagan. I'm currently blessed to be the director of the Arizona Department of Juvenile Corrections and was appointed by Governor Brewer to be the chair of the CARE team looking at this issue from a couple of different perspectives. What I'd like to present for you is just a slight update. First, we are posting all of our findings on our website so that we are being true to Governor Brewer's directive to be open and transparent about what's happening with this work of the CARE team. We have a number of staff from the Child Protective Services that are working for us full-time in our offices. We have approximately 175 employees that Director Carter provided to us that can work with our team either full-time or part-time to produce both boots on the ground work as well as administrative work. We have consistently gotten the resources that we need when we've asked for them, which is very heartening. One of the biggest hurdles we had initially was getting access to the information we need to be able to do the work, and that's because of an antiquated IT system, and the database is very difficult to access, and getting information is difficult. We've had a tremendous amount of support from Chief Greg McKay and Shalom Jacobs, who works for him, as well as from other staff that work for either directly Child Protective Services or the DCYF or DES umbrella. At the end of the first week, we had enough information to be able to start organizing our activities more consequently. And since then, one of the most important and impressive components of what we've been able to accomplish is to get boots on the ground. A number of cases had originally been reviewed at the direction of Director Carter, and some of those cases had been issued out to caseworkers. I made the tactical decision to not remove those cases from those caseworkers and allow them to proceed because it would have been duplicative and it would have slowed our progress. In addition to which, from the 175 part-time employees we've gotten that have been able to work for us, the vast majority of them are people who have worked in the field and worked in the field relatively recently. Those employees are trained, their fingerprint cards are up to date, and they are able to go out and do the same work that a caseworker or a line investigator would do. So they have been deployed, and I'll refer to the numbers we posted on Friday to you as well. In addition to that, approximately 25 employees are doing full-time administrative work for us or part-time administrative work for us. That means reviewing cases, verifying information. One of the things I wanted to avoid was putting information out that subsequently was changed. And everything we put out that could potentially be changed, we've annotated. So for example, we have identified on our website that we have 6,554 cases of NI, or not investigated. That 6,554 is reflected in the database as 6,552. The additional 2 cases were identified by one of Greg McKay's staff as having had what is called a broken disposition prior to the historical snapshot that showed these total number of cases. So we are still looking to make sure that there are not other cases, and so consequently I've annotated that number because it could go up slightly. The time frame for these cases go all the way back to 1997. 97 and 98, 2003 and 2008 each had 1 case only. We don't know why they're there. It's something that we're taking a look at, but all of these cases will be looked at by us. In 2009, which was the first date that I was aware of when I came on board, we had 666 cases, and then smaller numbers for the subsequent 2 years, and then the increases in 12 and 13 beyond that. We've made the decision also to prioritize the cases from 2013. And the reason for that is the calls are the most recent. They're the least likely to have subsequent CPS reports and or to have had law enforcement engagement with those children to assure their safety. So those were our first priority, together with 4 cases from 2009 that had been identified by the Office of Child Welfare Investigations as cases that needed an immediate attention. The total number of cases between the first review that was done by Director Carter's directive by his staff, as well as those cases that were subsequently reviewed by people we had selected in the care team, along with OCWI's work, came to 119 cases requiring an immediate response. All of those cases have been assigned, and there are staff following through on all of those cases. Governor Brewer made it very clear to me and to all of us that our task is to do 2 things primarily. First, it is to put eyes on children and ensure their safety, and ensure that every case associated with these 6,554 not investigated cases is investigated by CPS. We will have the ability to do some of that with the resources we've gotten while we are still conducting our work. But CPS staff will also be conducting these investigations subsequently. So we will ensure before our commission is over that all of these cases will have been assigned for investigation by CPS. Secondly, we were asked to look at the process, the policy, the procedures, the activities, and the personnel to determine what recommendations should be and could be made to prevent something like this from ever happening again. We have elected to view that not narrowly, to look at just the NI process, but more broadly, to talk about the systems and processes in place with CPS so that we can make sound recommendations to the governor for change so that not only would something like NI not happen again, but also we would be ensuring efficiency and effectiveness for the organization and the people who perform that work. I would like to take a moment before I go forward to simply say that we have been incredibly impressed by the people we've worked with. The caring that they have for the children and these families is enormous. None of the caseworkers we've interacted with that had gotten additional cases assigned to them, in addition to those cases that had been above the national standards that they had identified, have complained. None of our staff have asked not to work on the weekends or after hours. They all desperately want to be able to do this job, and they care tremendously for it. And that's exciting for us to be able to deal with those folks. On Friday, on our website, we reported what I think was an incredible milestone. We had gone from not having all the data and being able to identify these children and organize our activities. We had gone with the assistance of Curtis Ballard, one of the employees with CPS, who's assigned as our lead on our team, to organizing those resources I talked about and putting boots on the ground to get eyes on children. These numbers I'm about to report to you were reported Friday. They are already outdated, and we'll be giving new numbers every single day, but only when they've been verified. We had assigned 1,440 cases to people following through on these NIs. Now let me make it clear, there are many more than that assigned, but we validated and verified that these 1,440 cases are assigned and the staff know what they're working on. 676 cases have been verified as responded to. Now people ask what that is, and I'm getting an education as we do this. That they were responded to does not mean that we saw the child victim, we saw the other children in the home, or that we even made it to where they currently live. What it means is that a staff member has identified that they have responded, they've gone out to try to find this family and the child victim and make a report. And then also we verified, and I was very pleased with this number, 451 children were seen as of Friday, close of business. Actually it was a little more than that after close of business, but we got the report just before close of business. What this means is that we've done the first thing the governor has directed us to do, and that is to put eyes on these children to ensure that they're safe. And in some cases, either the staff assigned to the care team or the caseworkers assigned to CPS that are doing these cases have begun and are processing the investigations. The other thing I'd like to report to you is that we have begun, and frankly, Chief McKay and Jan Strauss, one of the other members of this team, should be acknowledged and recognized for having reached out to the law enforcement community so that we can identify law enforcement resources that could potentially help us in identifying these children and where they are. Ideas like that led to us having currently 12 law enforcement jurisdictions who have committed to working with us. They cannot take the place of the CPS investigation that is required, but they can put eyes on children. They can identify where these children are so that we can respond to see these children, and it's an enormous help to us. Of those 12 jurisdictions that have responded to us thus far, 2 of them were from the mayors. The mayor of Chandler reached out to Greg McKay, Chief McKay, even before the request went out to the rest of the law enforcement community. Subsequent to that, the governor's office referred to me, Mayor Lewis from Gilbert, and Chandler is the first community in which staff are being deployed to put eyes on children so that we can do the work that we've been given. I've heard the questions that you've asked of Director Halliday, and I will tell you that I wish I had a crystal ball in front of me. I am not sure when our work will be done. I know that we've been given 2 months in which to complete this work, and if I feel that the work needs to be extended, I would make a recommendation to the governor's office to do so. But I am absolutely driven and the staff and the volunteers who are working with us are driven to finding these children and beginning and or completing these investigations before our charge is due. And then secondarily, we've made some significant progress in the area of the second charge from the governor. As a result of former legislator Deb Gullett working with us, we have begun an aggressive process of looking at past recommendations that have been made relative to CPS with the assistance of personnel and people and entities in the community. We've been offered assistance in doing whatever work we need to do to be able to get that information to us and to review it. Different than Director Halliday, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and thank you for correcting me. Scottsdale was the first community that was reached out to us and has deployed people to work on these cases. Subsequent to our work relative the beginning of putting eyes on children with boots on the ground, we began the process of looking at charge number 2. And so Deb Gullett has taken the lead on that charge. She's working with Chief McKay, with a number of other people, Cindy Nanetti from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. We're very grateful for the assistance of people like this who have contacts, who have ideas, who have experience in this field. And so we have gotten the support of the Department of Administration and the Governor's Office, and we have the Government Transformation Office folks led by Rob Woods, who is working with us to identify systems and processes. They have already begun making trips out into the field to look at the call center and to look at community partnerships, which we're doing also with law enforcement, between law enforcement and child welfare community. So there's a lot of work that's going on, and we are very proud of the progress we made, but we know that this is a difficult task and it will take us a significant time to accomplish. I will continue to post those updates on the website, and we also have the ability to hear from the public. We've had support from the Children's Action Alliance, who are providing us with the notes and the recommendations and suggestions from the community forum that I've attended. We've set up a community forum in southern Arizona, in Tucson, and we're receiving calls and or emails and or website postings pretty much on an ongoing basis. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have of me if I've forgotten something.
Are there questions for Director Flanagan?
Sure.
Senator Bartow.
Thank you, Director Flanagan. Appreciate your work very much. You mentioned 175 staff was helping you. Are those community members or those CPS? I was a little fuzzy on that.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you very, very much for the question. First, we do feel blessed to do this work. Secondly, we do have some volunteers that we're going to be able to utilize, but the staff we're talking about are 175 employees that were identified by Director Carter and his staff that could devote their either full-time or part-time efforts towards the care team completion. For the most part, these are supervisors and managers who have promoted from the field and have experience in the field. And they are capable of doing the work. They have all of the qualifications, training, and certification they need to do the work that a caseworker or an investigator would do for investigations.
So they are not part of CPS at this point?
Madam Chair, they remain part of CPS as employees. However, they report to us for all of this work, and that, thank you for pointing that out. The Governor has made it absolutely clear to us in the care team we report directly to the Governor, and for all of their activities associated with the care team, they report through me to the Governor.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Montgomery and then Mr. Jacober.
Madam Chair, Director Flanagan, for the 6,554 cases that you mentioned and going through and reviewing those, I just wanted to make it clear that not all of those cases necessarily might be assigned to CPS. Some of those might be assigned to the Office of Child Welfare Investigations for follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Montgomery. Absolutely. It is very possible that some of those cases might need to go to OCWI or might be a law enforcement referral in another location. That doesn't negate the necessity of CPS from conducting their investigation through those means.
Correct. I just wanted to underscore that point, though. Some of those cases, while CPS may need to do an additional investigation for potentially other children who could be there who may not be a victim of a crime, or for whatever additional wraparound services might be needed for the child who's a victim of a crime, that some may also go to OCWI. And I wanted to underscore that. You mentioned that, gave me the opportunity, that if you look at the organizational chart for DCYF that was provided to members of the committee, and I would point it out for members of the media too, OCWI is not part of CPS. OCWI is not part of DCYF. That was a very explicit part of its creation, that it be within DES reporting to Director Carter, but not part of CPS. Again, I don't think we would know what happened if they had been. And the last point that I would just make to underscore what you mentioned about the law enforcement agency resources who've stepped up, not just as the Maricopa County attorney or a member of this committee, but just as someone who lives in Maricopa County, I'm proud of Mayor Lane from Scottsdale, Mayor Tibbs Shrani, and if Mayor Lewis isn't on that list, I'm sure he would be, in what they've done to help and to supplement these efforts. Thank you.
Mr. Jacober?
Just a quick question relative to what actually happens, because I get the idea that you put eyes on them and that's a safety precaution. But as you know, there's a whole variance of things that can happen to a child. They may need a variety of different things. So what actually happens once you put eyes on the child? What are the steps that happen? How do you track it? How do you decide what the next action is going to be, whether it be a criminal investigation, whether it be a service implementation, and those type of things? How does that happen and get implemented within the system of these 6,000? Well, as much as I appreciate the diligence of getting to the 6,000 and putting eyes on them, you got to take care of them as well. And so what is the process of how that's going to be handled?
Madam Chair, Mr. Jacober, thank you for the question, and I would like to start by saying that there will be some eyes on children work that's done by people who cannot complete an investigation. That's why that case has to be referred back. But the governor made it absolutely clear every one of these cases will lead to an investigation conducted by CPS. So that's also why we can't use volunteers to do much of the work that we're doing, and it's why it's only certified peace officers that would be capable of putting eyes on children that would suffice for that component of the work that we're doing. I don't pretend to be an expert on all of the statutes and the rules within CPS and surrounding CPS to understand exactly how the process will work, but one of the things that occurs with our staff that are capable of conducting investigations and or the caseworkers that have these cases is that they will be required to see that child, the victim child, as well as any other children in that home, to see the home and to conduct interviews with those children apart from their parents or guardians or whomever might be the family around there, and then to make recommendations for referral and or other action as necessary. So for example, OCWI, and I thank Mr. Montgomery for pointing out that I was remiss in pointing out the governor, is the person, who I report to that fought for, and with much support from people in the community like Mr. Montgomery in the legislature, got OCWI put in place. And I think it's imperative that you have an organization like that that does not report through the chain of command for the area that they're overseeing. But cases might be referred to them. We have a process and a protocol for that. Cases might be assigned to an outside law enforcement agency where OCWI does not have jurisdiction. Cases would be referred for services, and children might be removed from the home depending on what happens when we go into that environment. Now, the reporting mechanism is twofold. It's bifurcated for us. You have the normal reporting mechanism that exists within CPS, under DCYF and DES, and then you have what we've set up because we want quicker, more immediate information, and so that means that we're going to be relying to a certain extent on anecdotal information. So eyes on the child is certainly part one, but many of the children that are seen with eyes on the child will also result in an immediate investigation by either the staff that have been seconded to the care team or within CPS. So the normal process of assessment and investigation would take place.
Can I just get a clarification?
Mr. Jacober.
Thank you. So of the 676 you've found, how many have actually been taken into care? How many have been referred to some sort of a criminal thing? And how many have been referred for services?
Well, first, Madam Chair, Mr. Jacober, there have been There has been only one case that I'm aware of at this point in which a child was removed from the mother's home and placed in the father's home. That was the action that was needed. This particular case, the way we got that information was anecdotally, because we don't yet have the mechanism in place to ensure that we're going to get that information that I can then validate or verify before we publish it. But every high-profile case, it doesn't matter what the outcome of the case is. We won't, of course, release the names of the children or place them in jeopardy. But every high-profile case will be identified and discussed in our postings. We, of course, report that to the executive and to DES, rather. Oh, and I'm sorry, I should also mention that as we discover things that are part of the administrative investigation, they would be referred to Director Halliday for him pursuing that issue. He is primarily, and I don't presume to speak for him, looking at this case administratively, and he's looking for the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We need to know some of that information in order to make sound recommendations for change, but we're not interested in identifying, who did what for the purposes of administrative corrective action. It's for us because of systemic change, and that goes to the heart of the question you asked about what happens with these children when the investigation goes on.
Correct, but
Mr. Jacober?
I'm actually not clear on what happens. So I apologize, because I don't understand all the details of that. But I understand that one was moved, but there's 675 other ones that something happened. So what is happening with those other ones? I mean, are they all being referred? Or are some of them being then checked? Is the box checked and said there's nothing that we have to do? Or I'm not quite sure how you close the loop on it.
Madam Chair, Mr. Jacober, great questions again. Again, I don't have all of the specific answers, but I can tell you that every one of those cases must result in an investigation, no matter what the circumstances. So, for example, I think that this oversight group knows about alternative investigations, the AI process. We're not going to recommend that the AI process be utilized in any of these cases, even if it fits the AI criteria. We were given very clear directions from Governor Brewer. They will all be fully investigated and action taken to ensure that the child is being served and that we don't fail the child again.
Ms. Clevitter?
Madam Chair, Mr. Flanagan, it's actually interesting to me that you say that, and my original question was already asked by Mr. Jacober, which is of the 451 children that you have laid eyes on, how many, if any, had to be removed? Secondarily, and because of your comments, we were assured previously by CPS that 800 or so odd number of cases of these 6,554 were going to be alternate investigations. So can you speak to that?
Madam Chair, I hope I'm pronouncing
Clevitter.
Yes, absolutely, I can speak to that. Again, I've been given very clear direction from the governor. Every case will be fully investigated. It doesn't matter to us if it fits in the criteria of AI, but since we're involved in this, that is an unacceptable outcome. It must be fully investigated. And our involvement follows, I believe, the discussion that was had about whether or not these cases could be AI. Similarly, if we have a case where there was a subsequent law enforcement contact or a subsequent report to DES or CPS and then an investigation, that doesn't mean it's over for us. We're not excluding those. We're looking at those as well because there might have been other allegations that were made that need to be looked at. And in the time between that subsequent report or subsequent law enforcement contact, we don't know what's happened. So our charge is absolutely clear. We must see every child and we must make those referrals for investigation.
And
Ms. Clevitter?
if I could ask further, as a secondary question to that, understanding that your job is the scope of these 6,500 and some odd cases, moving forward from there, and you're looking at the processes at CPS, and thankfully for these 6,500 children, alternate investigation is not available. Are you also looking at that process at CPS that allows for alternative investigations, which, you'll forgive me, but from my layperson opinion, is basically we're not investigating?
Madam Chair, Ms. Clevitter, I am not an expert to say what would be happening potentially once recommendations are made by us. I somewhat understand what happens during an alternative investigation, but this would require, I believe, some legislative action, and it would require policy and systemic change. As I understand it, the nature of the alternative investigation is a higher threshold than had to be met by this nebulous process called NI. And there were people, mandatory reporters, who were interviewed, and there were reports written that talked about the safety of the child. That is only tangentially part of the recommendations we're going to make to the governor for change that have to do with the entirety of the system and how it protects children.
Thank you.
Mr. Owsley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Flanagan, real quick, the ultimate investigation that will be done by the care team and by the Child Protective Services employees, are we to expect that that's the same type of an investigation that would be done by a CPS investigator in a normal case?
Madam Chair, Mr. Owsley, yes, that's correct. The referral for investigation by us for all of the children associated, and it may be a much, much higher number than 6,554 children. These are 6,554 cases, so there are many more children involved, would be for the normal CPS investigation to follow our eyes on the children and referral for investigation.
Is there anything in addition to that normal process that will occur just because it's part of these 6,000 cases, aside from the timing maybe?
Madam Chair, Mr. Owsley, I don't know that there will be additional things, but there'll be a lot of scrutiny on these cases. And we have the advantage of being working close in hand with Chief McKay and OCWI, and many of his staff, some of the people that he's selected to work there, are incredibly knowledgeable about CPS and the process. So we're able to look at it with outside eyes. These are eyes that question everything and try to figure out exactly what happens and why it happens. I will tell you, I am absolutely convinced that everybody that's working on this group, both those appointed by the governor, those that are supporting us from ADJC, the Department of Juvenile Corrections, and or from outside, all of these folks care about the safety of the children, and that will be our primary focus in everything we do.
And
Mr. Owsley?
in making the recommendations to the governor, I'm assuming at some point that you will support that by facts that you've determined throughout your investigation, and by maybe some type of a procedural analysis, and that would be part of your report as well.
Madam Chair, Mr. Owsley, I can tell you I've had many challenges in my career, my 28 years almost in state service, but I will tell you that this is one of the most daunting, because to be able to make recommendations for systemic change that are not just simply narrowly focused in 2 months is a tall order. It's a very, very difficult charge for us. I know that what we recommend will not be complete. It will require follow-up work. It will require people from our shared communities that are contributing to the outcome here. But we intend to make the best possible recommendations for change to prevent not only NI from happening again, but also an organization that is not necessarily entirely visible to the public and is challenged to be responsive to the children that need help in this state.
Mr. Montgomery.
Madam Chair, Director Flanagan, I wonder if in the list of cases that you've received that have been part of the 6554, and this gets to Ms. Clavitter's point, I think implicit in some of Mr. Jacober's questions, would you be able to identify the 800 some odd cases that CPS was going to code as AI, and in your follow-up, I guess compare and contrast what your outcomes are with what they would have been with CPS? I think if you were able to do that, that would greatly assist this committee and the legislators who are on it, maybe to be able to follow up on some of those recommendations that your brief amount of time may not be able to fully vet.
Yes, thank you. Madam Chair, Mr. Montgomery, absolutely, we would love to be able to do that. I will share with you that not the entirety of 6,554 cases were reviewed by the folks who assessed many of them as AIs. Because we were interjected in the process, and I chose not to have the same group involved in assessing the cases that were involved in assigning them originally to NI. Consequently, we re-reviewed with staff that OCW and I and the care team put together to make sure that those cases got a review that we were comfortable with. But of those that were designated as AI by the CPS staff, we can certainly do that compare and contrast. We would hope to be able to give as much detail as possible on all of these cases, because there are some of them, well, just to give you the number, 119 cases, 4 of which I believe came from 2009, the rest came from 2013. Those cases were identified as needing an immediate response by people who work in this field. And that to me is a very concerning thing.
Mr. Montgomery.
Madam Chair, Director Flanagan, no, and I appreciate that too, because I think what we might be able to do then in looking at those particular cases with this opportunity for review is to determine whether or not additional legislative action might be required for that AI designation, either to tighten up what would be permissible for that, what an expected outcome might be, if it's even appropriate given how it was used. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Mr. Montgomery, I agree. We need to know all the facts, the details, the circumstances in order to make a sound recommendation. And this has to be a community effort in order to make this right.
Representative McCune-Davis.
Thank you. Director Flanagan, the difficulty in understanding the difference between an NI and an AI has been one of the things that I've been challenged by. Director Carter told us that all of the numbers have been reported in the semi-annual reports that the agency puts forward. We went through those. We backed out the numbers. In fact, the AIs were clearly designated, and frankly, the NIs were there if you did some subtraction. So all of this has been part of the agency procedure going back to 2009, and from your comments, even perhaps before. Are those cases being handled differently now, or are they just being handled differently now through the care team?
Madam Chair, Representative McCune-Davis, I will tell you that I do not necessarily believe that the I don't believe that the NI process was documented. It wasn't well documented, certainly. There was no policy that we could go to that would tell us what their criteria were. I can tell you in conversations with Chief Greg McKay and his staff and me in the beginning left me with a lot of headaches about trying to figure out how this happened. To the best of my understanding, something like NI existed prior to the new database childs being utilized in Arizona, because that helps to explain why we had a single case in 4 years prior to 2009. It must have been, some sort of error on someone's part. They tripped across the wrong button, hit the wrong button. We don't know. But we do know that in 2009 that there was discussion with the legislature surrounding budgetary cuts. And I don't claim to have all the knowledge about what happened back then. This was what was described to me. But I do also know that based on what people have shared with me, what happened in 2009 was very different than what happened in 2011, 2012, and 2013. So a lot of interpretation was given to what happened. And one of the problems when you have a system as large as this is that if you have people with the ability to override policy or law, you end up with a situation like this. Additionally, I don't think you should have to do the math to figure out what cases were what. The closest thing I saw was a report, an annual report, which talked about, I think, alternative assessments, lumping these numbers together. It wasn't, I don't think, clear to many of the people I've talked to that it was intended to list the NI cases as a separate entity, but simply to combine them as an alternative assessment in a larger category.
Well, Madam Chair,
Representative.
Director Flanagan, if you actually subtract the numbers out, there is a number that were clearly not investigated. And that's what's sort of fascinating to me, because the caseworkers who can't, we never know where the information's coming from, but clearly in the public hearing, the system was described as overburdened and stressed and overworked and many of those kinds of terms. And then there's been informal discussion, which is of limited value, but that those decisions were made when caseloads got too large. So in addition to the fact that we're laying eyes on children and making certain that their cases are being attended to, I think it's important that we actually do look at procedures, as you're doing, but even go a step further and ask the question if the community response that's needed is in place, because that's what's not involved in this conversation, and frankly not in your purview either. But when we talk about messages to legislators, if we investigate a case and the family doesn't get what they need, that family's coming back again. And I think that just needs to be noted.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I have a couple questions.
Senator Bartow.
Director Flanagan, you mentioned the, oh, I'm sorry, a couple things. I've got this other thing in front of me here. The hundreds of cases that were reported to be dumped in a trash. The department said that those were going to be investigated on how that came to occur. Has that been put on your plate? And the second question I finally remembered, you mentioned the broader scope of the recommendations to the governor. First, the charge was to make sure that this never happens again by finding out the processes that went awry. But then I hear you say that the scope is enlarged to include a broader set of recommendations. How broad are you going?
Madam Chair.
Thank you.
First, I am not aware that the cases that were found, the hard copy files that were found, fall under the purview of the care team when it comes to the NI cases. I've not heard that there's a connection between those cases, that these were NI cases. In fact, it'd be hard for me to understand how there would be a file associated with an NI case when it was pulled from the queue before the caseworkers or their supervisors even knew it was there. But if it does have some relation to that part of the charge, we would certainly look at it. I can tell you from a systemic perspective, it bothers me greatly that there are hard copy files that people have access to that have confidential information in them that is not secured in some way, that doesn't require us to know exactly where it is at all times and to be able to protect it at all times. When it comes to the discussion, forgive me please, I must not have stated clearly what I was talking about in our interpretation of the more broader interpretation of the governor's directive to us. The governor made it very clear the second charge was to look at systems, processes, policies, procedures, and personnel to make recommendations that something like NI can never happen again. But really, it's couched with words like efficiency and effectiveness. So to us, the people that are in this group that include a number of people in the child welfare world, it is our sincere hope that we can make a recommendation for change in this window of opportunity to do so, that are going to affect long-term change for the better to ensure the safety of the children that are vulnerable in the state of Arizona. We do not believe that simply narrowly focused on just the NI and preventing NI from happening again is adequate, because if we were to put a process in place and it stayed status quo, then it's always possible that somebody, just as happened now, changed direction or implemented things without it becoming broadly known or widely known, or having come from a directive that was policy level decision making or legislative decision making. So we are interpreting it to be broader because it covers the mission that we were given to leave a positive legacy.
And getting it done within 2 months, I would think that would limit you as well. But getting back to these cases that were found in the trash, I would think that they might be interrelated simply because these were cases that also may have not been properly being disposed of after they were set on someone's desk.
Madam Chair, I really do not know what's happening with that part of the investigation. As the director of an agency, I would assume that Director Carter has ordered those to be investigated and to provide him with details about what cases they were, who might have had them, which is similar to what Director Halliday is doing, except from the outside of the agency. And we would undoubtedly discover if it was related to the NI cases.
Director Carter?
Madam Co-Chairs, we had our Office of Accountability review the circumstances of the records that were placed outside of a dumpster. They were from a caseworker that worked for the agency in 2008 and 2009 and subsequently moved to California. We spoke to the individual. What she asserted is that because what happened is that there were records that were along with family photos, and that she had undoubtedly taken some files home to do some work on and didn't properly secure them. There's a very strict records policy that not only DCYF but all of DES has to train on each year. There is a need sometimes for individuals who are working on case files to export them, but there's very clear guidance for how it is that one has to protect those records. So these were the records of one caseworker that apparently when the home that she left was, when she left the home, she left some of these documents in a desk drawer. When they were cleaned out, they were then left in a dumpster outside of the home.
Mr. Chafee.
Director Flanagan, two questions. One on law enforcement and the terrific response that's happened in Maricopa County. I happen to be from south of the Gila River, and so I'm wondering what, if any, assistance you've been offered in Pima and some of the rural counties.
Madam Chair and Member Chafee, I don't have immediate knowledge of any of the organizations, law enforcement entities from broader in the state outside of Maricopa County at this point, but I do know that our requests have gone out, and I also firmly believe that we'll get the same kind of support that we got initially from close by. I'll give you one example. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, we anticipate, will be helping us and have offered their help in finding children that are in unincorporated parts of Maricopa County. There'll be similar circumstances elsewhere, and I'm sorry, I'm 60, so please forgive me. I'm not quite, my brain isn't where it was. I think we also have from Flagstaff and Prescott as well offers already. So I was a little bit behind. Yes, we do have those.
And then secondly, as part of your broad review, I would hope that you will look historically at a number of programs that were started in DES and were evidence-based and really efficient and didn't last. The lack of institutionalization of some of those programs, I think, plays a role in why we're here.
Madam Chair, Member Chafee, I think you're exactly right. The fact that in my own organization we've gone to evidence-based programs and then also had to validate that they were done with fidelity has produced tremendous outcomes, tremendous results. And so knowing what works and institutionalizing them is very, very important. I would say this, that I frankly am amazed that the caseworkers are able to do what they do with caseloads that are in excess, I believe, of 170% of their full caseload. So I know that the people have the heart to do these things, but given the time and the resources to do that, that's going to be a big challenge.
Mr. Chafee.
Thank you. I would also, though, ask you to look at, there were instances over the last 20 years in which there were programs that were started within DES, proved to be fairly successful, but never got to scale nor institutionalized. And an understanding as to why that occurred would help us also prevent that from occurring again.
Madam Chair, Member Chafee, I will certainly do that. We have intended to do that because we did get feedback from one of the community forums already about some of those cases where they were mentioned, where these programs were mentioned and shown to be effective.
Thank you.
Mr. Jacober, one more round.
Just one question, because I
Okay.
think it's important for all three of you to be in the same room. As you know, I'm representing foster families in this thing, and the number one question I get is, what are the roles between what the care team is doing and what this group is doing? Where do they overlap, and how are they different? I can't explain it, and so it'd be helpful while you're all together if I could get an explanation, so when I'm asked, I can tell people.
Mr. Flanagan, let's start with you.
Okay. Madam Chair, Mr. Jacober, one of the things that struck me as I stood watching the speakers during that first large community forum was how positive the environment was. No, with one exception, nobody came to accuse, point fingers, blame anybody. Everybody came with something positive to say, or a problem and a solution was recommended. It was at that forum that I heard about many of the things that have been tried in the past that hadn't worked. And foster families were very well represented. There were CPS employees that were well represented. And really the whole spectrum, I think, of the child welfare community was there. That's exactly what needs to happen. All of these various entities need to come together to come up with solutions. The solution can never be to just have enough people to handle the cases that come to you. It should also include prevention. It should also include partnerships where things have happened more expeditiously because of a good working relationship between one entity and the other. So other than telling you that I hope to achieve something like that, I can't really be specific about what recommendations we would make, but we are open to hearing everything. And we have heard, quite frankly, from foster care families, we've heard from adoptive parents, we've heard from really just about anybody you can imagine, to include people who've lost children through this process. And we are taking seriously what they're telling us, and we're trying to incorporate as much of that as possible in the work that we're doing.
And Senator Bartow, do you care to comment in response to Mr. Jacober's question about what's the difference?
Well, I guess your answer to that question, it surprises me a little bit, because I think our Oversight Committee is a little bit more to that charge, and that is not only making sure that we are overseeing the reforms that have already been implemented and are going to be continuing to be implemented in the department and the money spent, but to receive that information. I see the CARES group as specific to the investigation of these 6,000 cases and the processes that went wrong in regards to that. And giving recommendations to make sure that this, in accordance with that, the structure in place that made that happen or help facilitate it could be, those recommendations specific to that would be given to the governor and to us. Am I painting that picture about right?
Madam Chair, I certainly believe so. I wouldn't paint myself as an expert as to what this Oversight Committee does, but you correctly identified that DES, DCYF, and CPS have been engaged in some improvements that have already taken place and are in process still. I do believe that there is a certain amount of overlap in that I could not do a decent job. We could not present a decent recommendation to the governor without looking more broadly at the things that lead to the systemic failures that we're talking about. And I think in reading the two charges from the governor, it's clear that we have a very short period of time as opposed to the broader length of time that you have. We have a short and a small list of resources that we're utilizing to get there. But I think it would be inevitable that there would be some information that we discover that belongs in the purview of DPS's administrative investigation, or that would go back to the internal affairs for DES, and or would be doing things that support or run parallel to what this Oversight Committee is doing. We certainly do not believe that we should be, and I don't believe that I should be doing something that is within your realm. But certainly there are things that are within our oversight that we have to definitely make recommendations on, and we can't do that without information about systems, processes, and experiences that people have.
I think you're exactly right. One thing that might help to help us and the public understand better is what roles each of the players on the CARES team play. Maybe you could go into that a little bit more specifically.
Madam Chair, absolutely. I will tell you that we have a number of groups that have developed as a result of the work that we're engaged in. So, for example, OCWI, the Office of Child Welfare Investigations staff, together with some DES staff in IT, for example, together with team members, are working on data, on finding the data, getting answers to the question we have, identifying the cases that are within the jurisdiction of each of these law enforcement agencies, and being able to clearly identify and validate the information that's coming in. There's another major thrust, and that's law enforcement. At the inception, it was Chief McKay that thought to reach out, made the recommendation about school resource officers that are certified peace officers as well as law enforcement agencies, and that has blossomed to a large entity. We have a number of folks, two on the committee, on the CARE team, rather, I should say, as well as others that are supporting them, that are leading the efforts to organize how we interface, because we're adding to the workload of these communities. So we want to do what they're capable of doing and what they're willing to do in partnership with us. And so that requires communication. OCWI made recommendations for training, for example. We have purchased recorders, tape recorders, digital tape recorders. So those are things that we want to do going forward that will help the investigators do their work. We have the second charge team that's focused very clearly on meeting the second charge from the governor, that former legislator Deb Gullett is leading and heading, along with Cindy Nanetti working, who also, by the way, is working on the law enforcement outreach and is also advising us in the command center. So there's really nobody that hasn't been engaged at one level or another, including Senator Leah Landrum Taylor and Representative Brophy McGee, with whom I've had the pleasure of interfacing and interacting previously as the director of the Department of Juvenile Corrections, and you as well. So there's a fairly wide range of activities we're engaged in. Some people will do multiple things, some people will do single things. And I would be happy to try to reduce that to writing and share that with the committee so you can see who's doing what and who the point contact is.
Do you have a question? Because
I just had two quick questions, if I could.
okay, and then I'll wrap it up.
Okay. Thank you. Director Flanagan, just two questions. One, have you found that there have been any duplicate calls on the NIs? And the other is, have you found any of the cases that were NIs that actually found out have been in the system, that they were investigated, but... Okay.
Yes. Madam Chair, Member Condon, yes, we did find an overlap. There were a number of cases, and it's kind of logical to assume that that would have occurred. Fewer cases than we assumed, but over 1,000 cases, and I apologize, I don't have the number at the top of my tongue right now, but over 1,000 cases where there was a subsequent report that led to some action on the part of CPS. I don't know exactly how far that action went, but as I shared before, that does not mean that we would not still want to be able to see the child and all the children in that home and refer it for investigation, depending on the circumstances.
Okay, but none of them just actually were an NI in error because they weren't seen in the database, in the child database, that you hadn't seen?
Madam Chair, Member Condon, yes, we have found. Let me try and explain this as best I can because I'm not the most IT literate person around, but we have a database that was basically a snapshot in time that tells us what was in the system as of a date certain, and that was 6,552 NI cases. Because of the work of the team from OCWI, particularly Shalom Jacobs, we were able to identify that there were two cases that had been originally NI, but they were subsequently what they call a disposition was broken, so that NI doesn't show up in the database anymore. But we know it was an NI at some point. Therefore, we must react to it. And we are looking at a small window of opportunity for that to have occurred, and we're trying to track those cases down. That's why I said that 6,554 could increase nominally. We anticipate it probably will when we find a couple of those broken dispositions.
Okay, yes, I do remember. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and in conclusion, to go back to the role identifications, I would say that the crisis that was precipitated by the discovery of the 6,500 not investigated cases that resulted in a DPS investigation called for by Director Carter and the creation of the care team by the governor would provide an invaluable source of information to this committee as we go forward to our December 2014 recommendations. Information and data and systems analysis that we would not otherwise have. Things, I believe, may need to be changed in the short term, either, and of those, I think of them more as management or executive office. You know, the governor may wish to make some immediate changes to ensure the safety of children in the CPS system or the welfare of the CPS workforce. But at the end of the day, this is the committee to whom it's intended will go forward by December of 2014 to make recommendations for policy and statutory changes as needed, as we say would be needed. And I think with the existence of the care team and the creation of the care team and also the DPS investigation, which I hope is completed or wrapped up soon, thoroughly, accurately, but soon, it will provide us with invaluable information to do our work. So with that, Director Flanagan, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your comments.
Madam Co-Chairs, members, thank you very much.
Just as a quick housekeeping, there have been a couple of inquiries regarding public participation. Again, because we are still in foundational and information gathering stages, we are not taking public participation, and my apologies, regrets to those who had come hoping to testify.
And to that point, Madam Co-Chair, if there are members of the public that have specific incidences and cases that they would like us to know about at this point, please see Jenna. Jenna, are you here?
It's
from the
Jenna,
Senate.
raise your hand, or
maybe she's
wave.
not here. Marianne. And Marianne, Senate staff will make sure that Maria Hoffman, the Office of Family Advocacy, will get back with you to review that information and help you. So just that goes for any member of the public that's interested in having a problem with their own CPS case. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is a carryover from the prior agenda, and we didn't get to it. And that would be a presentation by the Office of the Auditor General on Children's Support Services, Foster Home Recruitment, Related Services Contract Audit. And with that, I'd ask the representatives from the Auditor General's office to come forward and introduce yourselves.
Madam Chairs, members of the committee, my name is Jeremy Weber and I'm with the Auditor General's office. Today I'll be presenting information from our special report on the Arizona Department of Economic Security's contracting for foster home recruitment. This report is the first of 3 reports required by laws 2013 related to the department's expenditures for children's support services. This report addresses expenditures for the recruitment, retention, training, licensing, and tracking of foster homes, an assessment of whether the department's contract process of home recruitment, study, and supervision is the most appropriate means to provide these services, and best performance measures to evaluate the effectiveness of these services. Licensed foster care is a critical option for children placed in out-of-home care. As shown on this slide, the department reported that as of March 2013, approximately 41% of Arizona children in out-of-home care were placed in family foster homes. The department contracts with licensed child placing agencies to provide most services related to foster home recruitment. Contracted services include recruiting and training foster parents, investigating the adequacy of potential foster homes, assisting foster parents through the licensure process, tracking foster homes, identifying and arranging child placement options, and supervising and monitoring licensed foster parents. And the department contracted with 21 child placing agencies as of June 2013 for these services. Contractors are paid for specific deliverables that are outlined in the contracts, including the completion of recruitment activities and training, and the number of filled foster home beds. In fiscal year 2012, the department paid approximately $18.9 million for contracted services. We found that the department should improve its contracting process for foster home recruitment. Contracting appears to be an appropriate method for recruiting foster homes. Literature indicates that the privatization of child welfare services is commonplace. Additionally, several states contract for foster home recruitment, although the specific contracted services vary. The department uses performance-based contracting for foster home recruitment. Performance-based contracting is a contracting approach that includes developing a clear set of performance measures to achieve program goals, using performance measurement data for contract monitoring and to evaluate contractor performance, and rewarding or penalizing contractors based on their performance. However, the department had not adequately implemented this contracting approach. Specifically, although the contracts included 16 performance measures, some of these measures were not adequately developed. For example, the performance measures do not adequately measure foster parent retention, and some of the measures were not adequately defined, which can lead to inconsistencies in how contractors interpret and report them. In addition, the department had not developed policies and procedures for monitoring the performance measurement data that it collected, and it did not use this data to evaluate contractor performance. Finally, the department's contracts were not adequately designed to incentivize performance. Contractors can receive an incentive payment for meeting 12 or more of the 16 performance measures. However, no contractor had ever received an incentive payment. In addition, the incentive structure did not target specific measures or goals or include potential sanctions, such as financial sanctions or contract termination, which can also help incentivize contractor performance. The department plans to revise and rebid the contracts, which have been extended through August 2014. To address these deficiencies, the department should solicit input from all appropriate stakeholders in developing the new contracts and develop clearly defined and realistic performance measures that reflect contract goals. According to literature and a contracting expert that we interviewed, performance measures should reflect the goals of a specific contract and should not simply be adopted from other entities. In our report, we provided a list of performance indicators that the department could consider in developing its own performance measures. We also recommended that the department develop policies and procedures for monitoring contractor performance, modify the contract's incentive structure, and continue contacting other states and experts or consultants for assistance as appropriate. The department agreed with our finding and plans to implement the recommendations, and we will assess the department's implementation of these recommendations as part of our follow-up process, which occurs at 6 and 18 months following the report's release. Madam Chairs, members of the committee, that concludes my presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Are there questions for the Auditor Generals? Representative McCune-Davis.
Yes, Madam Chair, Mr. Weber, do you know if the agency has a plan for a collaborative planning process? In this report that I noticed the date on it was October, so it's a fairly recent report. Mm-hmm. In the response from the agency, did they indicate action to be taken with something that is collaborative in nature?
Madam Chair, Representative McCune-Davis, in our conversations with the department, they did agree to this recommendation, and they were considering ways in which they might solicit that input, but I would defer to the department to respond to that question.
Well, Madam Chair, Mr. Weber, do you consider RFI a collaborative process?
Madam Chair, Representative McCune-Davis, an RFI is one way in which they could solicit public input. I guess depending on how that was implemented, it would depend on how collaborative it is in terms of dialogue between the parties.
Are you?
I guess an RFI is a written process to which people respond in writing. It isn't a dialogue. So thank you.
Okay, are there other questions? I'm sure there must be some. In terms of, because I do have a couple, in terms of a follow-up on the part of the Auditor General, and this may engage Director Carter in the conversation as well, my concern is that the recommendations were, or the findings were pretty significant, and it's, what is your follow-up going to be, Mr. Auditor General, in terms of how are they implementing, how are they responding, what are your next steps?
Madam Chair, our next step, as we approach the 6-month mark, we will contact the information to provide us a response as to where they stand with the recommendations, with implementing them, and to provide us with any supporting documentation to support that. We will review what they provide us, and then we will contact the department and request additional information or conduct other work necessary to determine where they are with implementing the recommendations.
Okay. And then Director Carter, where are you in, it sounds like a good idea that went out to bid, but I'm not hearing a lot of oomph behind it.
Madam Co-Chairs, the information that's presented in the Auditor General's report, the reason the agency concurs with it is because we were seeing these same issues in our review of the work around these contracts. The reason that we extended the existing contracts is to put in place a process, a collaborative process that would allow us to re-engineer these contracts. Quite frankly, from my perspective, it looks as if we used boilerplate contract development in setting these in place that did not take into account the specifics of how child welfare operates, and so it didn't seem to us to make sense to, because we had not re-engineered the contract. It didn't make sense for us to go back out to bid until we had gone through this work. That's why we've extended them through 2014. We will incorporate all of the recommendations of the Auditor General and some others that we think will allow us to better contract for these services, and also be able to, we've built other mechanisms to better monitor contract utilization. The department has not, in the aggregate, had the most robust contract monitoring, and so and this has been detailed by our Office of Accountability, and so we are taking all of those recommendations into account when we look to redo these contracts. I think the other thing that I would say is that to Representative McCune-Davis's issue of an RFI is certainly a tool to solicit external support. I do believe that there are relationships in the Arizona child welfare community that would allow for a much more robust dialogue than can be put simply on paper. Having done pretty much every methodology to solicit support, RFIs, I have found, have worked very well in when I'm soliciting information around building a technology system, when I'm trying to understand what's in the industry. I think what's needed here is to understand what's needed in Arizona, and I think that the bringing together the Arizona child welfare community is all that we need to be able to provide the most robust contracting, and that's part of our plan here.
Mr. Jacober.
Madam Chairpersons, I think part of the reason why there's no comment. I'll give you a foster parent perspective on this. Part of the reason why there's no comment, this is such low-hanging fruit that he picked it up off the ground. This is easy. I mean, we've seen this for as long as I've been a foster parent, that these problems have existed. So this is not new, so there's no questions to be had. I think the important part of this is, what is DES or CPS going to do about this, which is what's relevant here. Okay, because I think you guys did I don't know how I got this, but I got this home report, and I went through it and I said, got it. And so the natural next step of this is, to your point, what is that process going to be? How are you going to spell it out? Who's going to do it? And then how are you going to measure these outcomes that you could change through this process? Whether it be RFI is the right one or not, I don't know. But until we get something from CPS that says, here's the new, based on this finding, here's the new things that we're going to try and do, it's hard to react. That's why I don't think there's really any questions on this particular report, that from my perspective. I don't know if that helps you or not.
I guess to that point, Director Carter, I would ask, when you're engaging the community, are you engaging the foster parents in rectifying some of those and focusing some of those goals on the new contracts?
Madam Co-Chairs, we will make available for this committee a complete plan for how we are re-engineering our child support services contracts at our next hearing.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from other members of the committee? Okay. With that, we will then move on to Department of Economic Security, Congregate Care.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having me today. My name is Michael Weishart. I am the Acting Deputy Assistant Director for the Division of Children, Youth, and Families. I'm responsible primarily for all the business and finance operations within the division. I would like to provide a brief overview of the status of our foster home system as it exists right now. Obviously, this is very brief. We can talk at considerable length about foster homes and the challenges as well as the successes that we've had. This is going to be a relatively high-level overview. I do look forward to the dialogue that ensues. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Office of the Auditor General staff and the work that they did in informing us of, again, some of the systematic issues that I found 9 months ago when I showed up on the job in the division, but that are extremely important and that we need to address as we move forward. They certainly provided some information on some of the things that we were doing well collectively, as well as some of the challenges that the system faces in its entirety. I'll also provide a very brief set of information about the children in congregate placements. I hope that you all have the presentation that we put together in front of you. I noticed that it's not on the wall for the audience, but I do hope that the presentation that we put together is available. But just some high-level statistics. There are about 6,000 children in a family foster home placement right now. That's up from about 4,500 in 2008. The number of family foster homes on the subsequent slide has dropped a bit. The page 3 of my handout indicates that when you look at the red bars, those are the number of foster homes that we've lost from the system. When you look at the blue bars on that chart, that's the number of family foster homes that we have added during those 6-month time frames that are indicated in the presentation. We have dropped a little bit in the number of family foster homes since 2009. We do an exit study with families that leave the foster home system, and it's extremely instructive to us what's happening. But really the two primary reasons that we see that individuals leave the family foster home system is, one, either they adopted the child that they were caring for, and so they're moving out of being a foster home and instead moving into an adoptive home situation, which is certainly a positive and something that, while we would like those families to stay and continue to foster children because clearly they care about the well-being of Arizona's children, it is obviously a family decision that they're making, and we certainly respect and understand that. The second reason, which is slightly more troubling, or significantly more troubling, is that we lose a lot of family foster homes because they don't feel supported by their caseworkers and or the HRSS provider system. And so right now we've talked I think at length about the sort of overburdened caseworkers, and one of the ancillary effects of a situation in which the caseworkers have more on their plate that they can do is they're not as responsive to children in the family foster home system as we would like them to be. We've done a couple of things. When you look at the system, increasing its capacity, we have two major ways to go. One is to maintain the families that we have, and the other is to recruit additional families. And obviously, when you think about the amount of training that goes into becoming a family foster home and moving in that direction, the thing that we would like most is to keep the family foster homes that we have right now. So the next slide, I think, has some information on the efforts that we're undertaking to retain the families that we have currently in the system. We conducted some specific trainings for families to make it a little bit simpler to remain, to keep your license renewed and try to remove some of the burden on the family foster home so we didn't lose people out of the system because we weren't making ourselves available. We've done some events with the Diamondbacks and Arizona Serves, Hope in a Future, some really major players in Arizona as far as assisting families in some special events to allow for foster children to experience some really neat things at no cost to the families. We created a newsletter in order to better spread information about what's available for families, and then I think one of the more important things that we did is we created sort of a warm line for families who aren't getting a response from the individual in the field. They can then have a number to call where there's somebody always there to listen to the issue and at least begin to provide resolution to the situation and make sure that it's followed up on appropriately and that the situation gets resolved. In addition, there's a tremendous number of recruitment efforts that are going on. Targeted recruitment, there are specific populations that we need additional families for. Teens remain a significant challenge. Families with large sibling groups are a challenge as well. And so, and there are certain geographic neighborhoods where obviously additional foster homes would be extremely useful. We're targeting our recruitment efforts with our HRSS provider community in order to address these issues. We continue to develop trainings in preparation for some additional kinship homes, which is obviously a really good way for children to be cared for when they are in foster care. And we are continuing to engage the community in many of these activities. I certainly have many meetings with stakeholders to solicit ideas on how to continue to improve the work that we do. On slide 6, there is a conversation about the work that we're doing with faith-based organizations. Arizona 127 and Our Kids, Our Care are two examples, but there are many others where we're engaging the faith-based community to assist in this really important work in increasing the number of homes that are available. And in addition, of course, because we really want to make sure that the entire community is engaged in this activity, there's the Children's Heart Gallery and other activities to really have a more broad-based view of the situation and trying to help increase the number of family foster homes. In the Auditor General discussion, moving to slide 7, there's a conversation about the lack of performance measures that are being utilized to measure the family foster home community in Arizona, and I certainly agree wholeheartedly. When I got there, many of the measures that I would like us to have been developing over time and have more in-depth understanding of weren't there. And we're going to continue to work on that. I think at this time, the RFI is one example. I certainly have, I've been to, in the 9 months that I've been in the division, I've been to 3 meetings with the entire HRSS contractor community in regards to what they're seeing that's working, what they're seeing that's not working. So we're going to continue those dialogues. I've had many conversations with foster parents like Mr. Jacober about some of the challenges that they see from their end as they work through the provider to the department and try to understand how the system works in its entirety. We need to get better at the measures that we have. That being said, there are a few measures that are consistently tracked. It's important to us to understand how the family foster home system is working in Arizona. And so, slides 7, 8, and 9, the three things that I think we focus on at a really high level are, the capacity of our foster home system, the stability of the foster home placements, and then the safety of the children that are placed in foster homes. So the next three slides provide a little bit of an understanding of how we rank nationally in some of those categories. For capacity, Arizona is 37th out of the 52 jurisdictions that ACF measures. Obviously, we've got capacity issues in Arizona. We have way more children in foster care than we have homes for. So, those recruitment and retention efforts are going to be paramount going forward. So anyway, we're 37th in capacity. On stability, the number of placements that a child is in, the different placements in any episode of being in foster care, Arizona ranks relatively favorably. We're 12th out of the 52 jurisdictions. So stability is better. I mean, we need to improve because obviously every time you move a child in foster care, it is an adverse event for that child, so we need to continue to work on that. And then in safety, Arizona ranks 8th out of the 52 jurisdictions. So relatively speaking to the other jurisdictions, and clearly any one event is, unacceptable, and we need to continue to ferret out any opportunity for those situations to occur. But from a national perspective, we're 8th out of the 52 jurisdictions in Arizona. So while there is a tremendous amount of work to do, there is also a little bit of positive news in some of that information. Slide 11 contains some information about, sort of what happens when a child can't be placed in a family foster home. And there are reasons, many reasons why a child wouldn't end up in a family foster home, either the lack of availability of a foster home, the specific needs of that child. More often than not, I think behavioral health is one of the major players in not allowing that child to maybe fit most comfortably in a family foster home environment. And age is often a barrier as well. And so what we find is that teens are at least 10 times more likely to end up in a congregate setting than younger children. We just simply don't have enough homes available for teens. And so, one of the thrusts of the HRSS contract resolicitation will be looking at these sort of harder to serve populations when it comes to family foster homes and figuring out ways to address those barriers and move in a direction where additional children are able to be placed in a family-like setting, because certainly that's better for the child and it's significantly cheaper for the state. So we're going to continue in that direction. With that, I'm available for any questions that you all would like to ask.
Senator Landrum-Taylor.
And thank you, Madam Chairs. A little, maybe some questions, but I do have some comments. And with the presentation that you gave, and specifically touching from 2009 until present, and I look at this because I don't want to have it where we have another crisis that will be on our hands. And that's the fact that there are so many foster care families that have stopped doing this because of that sheer frustration, not having the significant amount of the wraparound services that necessitate having a successful opportunity for that foster child as well as for that foster family, and just the overall frustration of dealing with that process in its entirety. These kinds of things, and we've talked about this throughout the last few years, how when you take away, whether it's reduction of clothing allowance or minimizing respite care, or you would just go down the list, and I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but certainly the the retention solutions, I'm very concerned about that, to hear which direction is the department going with that. And I have a burning angst as it relates to the increase in the number of children in congregate care that are under the age of 12. And then we hear of the stories of sometimes children having to spend the night in offices of caseworkers. And again, we don't want to go from crisis to crisis to crisis. So I'm very curious to hear about retention plans, what's going on what are we going to be doing, and how then are we going to be increasing to help out with these wraparound services so that foster care families can feel supported and not just left out in the wind.
Absolutely, Madam Chair, Senator Landrum Taylor. Going back to the point that you make about the financial resources that are available for family foster homes, I think just to make sure that we're all on the same page about, to provide a little bit of context, going back to fiscal year 2009 when the state faced some significant budgetary constraints, decisions were made at that time to reduce, many of the financial contributions to family foster homes in order to help them really offset the cost, to be honest with you, of care for children in foster care. And I think, in my dialogues with family foster homes, the amount of reimbursement, for lack of a better word, that they receive to care for those children almost invariably is less than the actual cost of caring for those children. And so some of the reductions included a 20% reduction to the base rate. Many of the allowances for clothing, for school, those were cut in half, and then a few of the allowances, most notably I think the vacation and sort of camp allowance that allows foster children to go on vacation with their foster siblings, or in the house that they're being cared, that was eliminated in its entirety. And I think from a departmental perspective, clearly that's been a challenge. Mr. Jacober can certainly speak, I think, more specifically about the situation that has ensued as it relates to families trying to care for children. And I think, the dialogue needs to continue about what it would cost to restore those. I think, as you members of the legislature are aware, in the last legislative session, one of the iterations of the appropriations bill included money to restore the 20% reduction in the family foster home rate. That ultimately was not included in the final piece of legislation that was passed. Therefore, the rates remain as they were before. So we are where we are as far as the retention challenges that exist. From a resource economic standpoint, we're going to continue to delve into looking at what the best way to address those barriers are. From a, looking at the information that's available in regards to the supports that are available for families, as Director Carter mentioned, we will deliver a comprehensive plan for what we're going to go forward with on the sort of HRSS contract solicitation plan. As part of that, we'll make it clear how we intend to engage sort of the HRSS contractor element of, the system. They're such an important integral piece of it because they have specific opportunities to engage with the individual families as well as sort of share collective stories across the system. So I think what we need to do is sort of utilize that really important and on-the-ground resource to build up the supports that are available for the foster families. In addition, we will continue to gather and analyze the information that's coming in through the warm line as to what the issues specifically are for families, what they're facing. And so we will be continuing to address those barriers, but really trying to help the line staff, the field staff, that are out in the field working as diligently as they can to meet all their court-mandated requirements, as well as help the children that are in the family foster home system. We just got to continue to break those barriers. And I apologize for not providing some additional specificity in this moment, but I think we are going to continue to work with the provider community, with the advocates who are very knowledgeable in this area, and continue to address those issues as we go forward. And that will be a component of the plan that we produce for the next meeting, is how we propose to move forward in that area.
And Madam Chair, and thank you so much for that. I think just the bottom line in all of it is there, and this is just what I'm hearing from many foster families that have either decided to not do it anymore or are starting to make that decision, and that's the fact that they just, it gets to the point of affordability. So many of the foster families are then having to come completely out of their own pockets in order to take care of basic needs for the foster children, and it's becoming a financial burden is another thing that I've heard. But when I take a look at slide number 11, and I know these numbers have kind of vacillated and went back and forth throughout the years, but when I see things like 70% of the children that are in congregate care for 31 days to 12 months, increasing from there. That's a very high percentage. And then when you look at that mark again of those that are 12 and under, that's just beyond a huge concern. I think we really need to take a look at this as a committee, and certainly within the department, because that is not an ideal situation for little ones to be in congregate care. And we have worked on measures in the past where we have decreased those numbers, and now it looks like they're really starting to rise again, which is a big fear I've had for a long time. Thank you.
Ms. Klebiter.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Weishart, I have so many questions, so many things I would like to talk to you about. I could probably be here all day. In the interest of time, let's first talk about congregate care, because I have had numerous licensed open bed foster families contact me saying that they are desperate to get these children out of group homes, and they are meeting obstacle after obstacle and being unable to find a placement that the group home is willing to let go of and their licensing agency is willing to move. And I'm just not sure I understand what is the holdup or the process that has to be gone through for these children to have real families meeting their needs every day, as opposed to group homes, which we all feel is unacceptable.
Madam Chair, Ms. Klebiter, I think from a departmental perspective, when you talk to anyone who's working in the field, we agree wholeheartedly with the sentiments that you have. There's nobody in the field that wants to see that child in a congregate placement as opposed to a family foster home. And so we need to continue to delve into the processes by which we help children get into the most family-like setting. And we have, in fact, made some progress in this area. I think it's been, when I have attended sort of the field conversations that have occurred regarding, what is the main emphasis that's being addressed by the leadership for the field. One of the main topics that they continually work on from a leadership perspective that they try to get down to the field level is we've got to get these children out of congregate placements and into family-like settings. It's better for kids, it's better for budgets, it's just better. And so, I don't, I've certainly heard some anecdotal information about specific instances where there are obstacles. I haven't been able to, I think, in my work so far, draw I see where the hang up is in the process, and so let's go out and fix that particular issue. I mean, there's always sort of, logistical issues. Either the foster home that needs a child is in, a wealthy neighborhood where we don't really remove a lot of children, and so, there's kind of neighborhood issues that, we're facing, that kind of stuff. And so we continue to work through and try to address those obstacles. I mean, I'd love to hear some of the specific stories that you've heard, and we will try to continue to delve into the process.
And Ms. Klebiter, to that point, Director Carter, please feel free to join in with any response to assist this nice gentleman. I've heard the same thing. So there seems to be a hang-up in getting children out of these group homes and over into single foster or family foster homes. Are the group homes holding on to them?
Madam Co-Chair, I apologize, but I don't have, as Mike was saying, we don't have a specific understanding at this moment of what all of the elements are. We're trying to glean those. Know that it is absolutely everyone's interest, as Michael says, for us to not have children residing in congregate care. And so we are in a process of trying to figure out how we can make that, one, have enough homes, but also have the process as efficient and effective as possible. That is a work in pursuit.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Klebiter, for letting me ask that follow-up question. Please continue.
Just as further, and let's not differentiate and say that foster care is about finances. I have been in two professions in my life, a police officer and a foster mother, and no one does either one of those things for the money provided. have you looked into, I have numerous friends, acquaintances, people that I know that do either non-relative unlicensed foster placement or relative kinship placement. And even saying that they're not in it for the money, it's not about the money, most of these homes receive somewhere between $30 and $75 a month to care for a child. And so of course I'm sure that the department would prefer that method. Have you looked into providing beyond, and you have to forgive me, but I know there was some talk about money being set aside for kinship placements, and the number was so phenomenally low to me that I just could not believe it. Have you looked into providing more resources or financial resources for those families that have not been licensed but still are doing the same job and providing the same care?
Madam Chair, Ms. Clevitter, one brief point of clarification before I respond to the question. You know, the department's position is to ensure the safety and well-being of children and families. Certainly we have resource constraints on the financial side, but I don't think in any instance when, you know, even me being responsible, I guess, for the budget of the division, you know, I don't think at any time we you know, would prefer to take a cheaper option if it's not in the best interest of children and families. But as far as resources being made available to unlicensed families, in 2006 or so, the federal government, through their major federal contribution to the child welfare environment, Title IV-E, made the decision that they were no longer going to participate in the reimbursement of unlicensed providers. And in Arizona, that is a really robust group of individuals caring for you know, some 6,000 children in any given month. And so the federal government made a decision that they were no longer going to pick up any portion of the tab for any kind of a maintenance payment for those children. And so the state would have to have absorbed the entirety of the maintenance payment, and policymakers at that time chose not to you know, make the 100% investment that would have been required to pick up that maintenance payment. And so that decision has carried forward to today. Clearly, are there resource issues in many of the families that are you know, caring for kinship? Absolutely. And would they benefit from additional resources being available to them? Would the children be better off? Absolutely. At this time in the budget construct, there isn't funding to provide that. Outside of, in the recent legislative session, there were a few legislative champions that provided for a $1 million stipend for grandparents and great-grandparents, which is not enough to cover the cost of care. It's not even enough to cover the entire cost for all the children that are being placed in grandparent and great-grandparent kinship placements for an entire year. But it will cover, you know, it will offset some of the cost, and it is an important step, I think, to help grandparents and great-grandparents begin to defray some of the cost. And so they will be receiving a $75 per month stipend to help pay for the care of the costs for the children in their placement. It's, again, a small piece, but at this time that's what's there. And the conversation and the dialogue needs to continue.
And I just have one further question,
Ms. Clevitter,
if I could. Do you know what, if anything, or maybe you can tell me and maybe you can't, it appears to us as a group of, and I was a foster mother, and if I could just clarify for you, I neither gave up my license by my choice, but we adopted 6 children from foster care in the last year and a half, and my agency first asked and then forced us to close our license. And that being said, prior to the adoption of my first daughter, we were told that we would be given adoption respite care. And it appears that even just recently, that program was cut greatly. And so I'm wondering if you know anything about that so that I can tell people that are questioning me about why was it cut and, you know, what was the reasoning behind that.
Madam Chair, Ms. Clevitter, firstly, thank you for you know, stepping up and helping Arizona's children and caring enough to adopt those children. That certainly speaks volumes for you and your family's sacrifice and willingness to help children in need. So we certainly appreciate that. As far as the adoption respite, I'm not aware of any reductions to that particular program. Not saying that they didn't happen, just that I'm not aware specifically of any reductions. Certainly there were no budgetary decisions to reduce that particular program over the past 9 months anyway. Now whether something was in the works and then implemented after, I'm not sure. So I'll have to go back and find out what the backstory is behind that. And to your point of the license being closed, we'd have to look at the specific situation, and I don't know what the thought process was there either.
Right.
Thank you. Ms. Condon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Weishart, I have to say I was very happy to hear today that the second reason for the closing was because of the way the foster parents felt they were being treated or not being communicated with. I've never heard that before, and that's how it has been for myself, and I do apologize because we did have to close out our foster license, and the reason we did is because it was too much stress on my family. The husband, other children, we're all in it together. When a family fosters, everybody fosters together, and it's got to be a team decision. But with that being said, what type of training is done with case managers, supervisors, area program managers, the whole department, in regards to customer service, respect, the relationship with foster parents? I recently had the opportunity to interview Director Carter for a foster training that I had, and one of the things that I wanted to make sure was clear was that the foster parent was a team member, and Director Carter, I was very pleased, said it several times in the videotaping for these families. However, that message does not get through to all the workers. And so I need to understand what is being done on that part so that can help retain your current foster families.
Madam Chair, Ms. Condon, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the specific block of training that is provided to individuals that enter the field, so I can't speak specifically to, what elements of the training might be customer service oriented or family foster home oriented. I mean, obviously, I appreciate your insight, which will allow us to go back and strengthen those components of the training that we currently have in place. And so we'll absolutely go back and ensure that we augment whatever training we have in that area right now to make sure that it is understood, because Director Carter's right. And I think, from my perspective, personally, I won't speak for anyone else, it's imperative that we help the foster family community in any way that we can. Continually coming back to sort of the same drum. Anytime you get a stressed, overworked workforce, I think one of the elements that is going to get lost is niceness, if you know what I mean. And so, hopefully we can continue to evaluate the way resources are utilized and ensure that they're being put to the best use to maintain the foster family environment, but also do the other work that's necessary. And I'll work with the training folks to find out exactly what it is that we do and figure out how we can make that a little bit cleaner and better to ensure that the communication is effective and positive as it can possibly be.
Is this an answer that we can request in regards to?
Well, to that point, Ms. Condon, I appreciate your testimony. Is foster care, are you in charge of that for the department?
Madam Chair, I am just in charge of the contracting piece. The actual, where children move through the system is all done in field activity, and I don't have any purview over that. Because
Director Carter, I will continue to give you latitude to jump in any old time you want, but what I'm looking for, one, I want to be respectful of the committee's time, but two, we've had several questions that you haven't been able to answer, and I was looking for someone else in the room who possibly might answer those questions, or we could put it on the list of questions we want answered.
Madam Co-Chair, could I ask
Director Carter.
Could I ask our Assistant Director for the Division of Children, Youth, and Families, Flora Sotomayor, to help us?
Yes, please.
Flora, could you join us, please? Thanks, Michael.
Good afternoon.
And for the record, please state your name. Thank you.
My name is Flora Sotomayor. I'm the Assistant Director for the Division of Children, Youth, and Families within the Department of Economic Security.
Okay. did you hear the question? Ms. Condon, do you want to repose your question?
Yes, thank you. In regards to the training that the area program managers, case supervisors, and case managers receive for about foster parents, what are you doing to train staff to treat their foster parents with respect that would come along lines of customer service and so on in order to affect those numbers of foster homes that are closing? What is in their training right now for them?
Madam Co-Chair, Ms. Condon, members of the committee, right now the training is that every worker, when they go through their training, the Child Welfare Training Academy has a portion on working with foster parents. And what we as an agency convey is that foster parents are a critical resource for us and should always be treated with the utmost respect, first of all, and that when foster parents call or have questions, that we need to be very responsive to those requests and provide information. That's why we created the warm line, knowing that that other part isn't happening all the time, and I know that it's a frustration for foster parents because they're not getting the information they need or aren't even making contact with the person to ask a question. And so the warm line helps in that we have someone dedicated to take those calls and then check with the field and ask what's going on, what is happening, why isn't someone calling this foster parent? And so, the message that we give to staff is that foster parents are critical to our work and that they should be treated with the utmost respect.
And thank you.
Ms. Condon.
Thank you, I'm sorry. Perhaps we need some level of measurement, some accountability, because unfortunately, although I'm not a foster parent, I advocate for them, and I am working with the church under the A27.org to strengthen those foster parents so that they don't leave. But I'm continuing to hear the problem of the disrespect. And we say that our workers are overworked, but yet, unfortunately, and obviously this isn't everybody, I'm not going to put everybody in one pool, but enough of it, and often enough, it happens where the foster parent is not a part of that team. And if they were looked at, then they could really help the workload of that case manager, because they live the day-to-day and they are putting down facts, and that's part of what I teach them, is to share facts, not opinion, not feeling. So there needs to be something that is much stronger that is brought to the caseworkers so that they are held accountable, and also the case supervisors, because it goes up, because if you're not happy with the case manager, it goes to case supervisor. Well, if you're getting the same reaction from the case supervisor, you know what to do. And these children are number one, and you don't want to fail the kids. So you keep on fighting as long as you can.
I think that was more of a comment than a question, and I'd like to go. I have several people committee members. Mr. Montgomery.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. And Ms. Sotomayor, can you tell me in the congregate care how many children who are placed there are named victims in criminal cases?
I don't have that information in front of me, but we don't track how many of those children in congregate settings are actually part of a criminal case, other than knowing what the specific allegation was, whether there was involvement by local law enforcement or OCWI, and where that case might be in process with the law enforcement investigation and with the county attorney's office.
So if I understood,
Mr. Montgomery.
If I understood the answer right, then you are tracking, though, where it might be in the prosecution process?
Mr. Montgomery, members of the committee, Madam Co-Chairs, we don't track where they're at in the process as a system, other than individual workers might be in contact with staff from the county attorney's office or from law enforcement in regards to that specific case and that situation. in that case.
Okay, that, Madam Co-Chair, and Ms. Sotomayor, that begs another question then. How is there any degree of supervision from DCYF to ensure that licensed foster care families or those who have licensed congregate care are adequately ensuring that the child's victim rights are being enforced and protected?
Madam Co-Chair, Mr. Montgomery, members of the committee, there is no systematic way of doing that other than working with the victim rights organization, giving them access. An example is they often might not know who a worker is assigned to a child. They have been given a number in our main office where they can call and obtain that information, because we realize and we know that it's important that the child's rights be upheld in terms of them in the role as a victim in a crime. And so we try to facilitate the contact between the victims' right organization and the children who are in out-of-home care in a foster care setting.
Okay, I've heard the bureaucratic answer. Now, what I'd like is an answer to my question. How does CPS or DCYF ensure that a child who's a victim of a crime and is in a foster care setting is having their victim's rights observed and protected? How do you systematically, and if the answer is you don't, well, then that's a recommendation. How do you make sure that it's happening?
Madam Co-Chairs, Mr. Montgomery, members of the committee, the only way to ensure is by giving access to the victims' right organization to have contact with those children, to prepare them for hearings, to know when a hearing is happening. We will work with the individual children, but there is no systematic way of ensuring it. Despite, we have been making efforts to we've been talking with the victim rights organization through the Attorney General's office, and are making the effort to make sure that all our staff know that the children in their care do have rights in regards to being a victim, and to ensure that that contact is not in any way avoided between the organization who handles the victim rights and us.
Okay, well, and that's good to hear, because that was a 2008 reform. But in terms of, there's not a victims' rights organization per se. You have within the criminal prosecution whoever is responsible for taking care of the child to make sure that they're responding to subpoenas and that the child's rights to be heard in the process are being heard. The Attorney General's office doesn't have anything to do with that per se. So I'd like to add to a list of follow-up questions then, if we can know the number of children who are named victims in current criminal cases who are in congregate care and otherwise in foster family placement and kinship placement. If we can get that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Mr. Owsley?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chairs. I'm not sure who to direct this question to, maybe to Mr. Weishart or Ms. Sotomayor, I guess maybe to the both of you. The question that I have has to do with retention of foster homes. And going back to what I believe is one of the most important reasons for foster parents living in foster care, and it's the lack of support. Again, it's something we've heard over and over. It was something that Mr. Weishart commented on earlier. It was something that was the focus of the ASU study that was done about a year ago. Again, and as much as all of us here appreciate the issue of funding and resources and the lack thereof, and the fact that departments' hands are tied to some degree, I don't believe that that's something that we necessarily should focus on at all, sitting here as committee members. And so if I'm going to ask you a question, I guess my question would be a pie-in-the-sky question. If money's not an issue at this point, what do you believe are maybe the most significant changes the department can make at this point, or maybe in the next year, that would have an impact on that relationship between foster parents and case managers? And again, the focus on the department and their relationship, and be able to address concerns that foster parents have. Again, money is not an issue. If that was the question, what would your response be?
Madam Co-Chairs, Mr. Owsley, members of the committee, a pie-in-the-sky answer would be that our staff who manage our foster care cases, which we call ongoing, carry a manageable caseload size that would enable them to answer the calls when foster parents call, to be able to go to their home to see the children and visit the foster parents to be able to have the time to follow up on issues that the foster parents might have, to make sure that they get notified that there's a staffing, or even a simple phone call, is there anything you need? I think that would go a long ways towards improving that relationship. The fact is that relationship gets damaged when there is no response at all from anyone from the department.
Mr. Owsley.
And I guess the same question to Mr. Weishart, would it be the same? I mean, it sounds like, and we've all talked about this on occasion, that caseloads seem to have a huge impact, not only on the work that's done on a daily basis in the system, but also you know, work outside with foster parents and the such.
Madam Chair, Mr. Owsley, I would second what Flora said as far as the you know, manageable caseloads, and add 2 additional thoughts in sort of my pie in the sky world. And one of them isn't going to be pie in the sky. One of them we need to do, and that is to tighten up the HRSS contract so that everybody understands what their role is in this process, and you know, the department understands what we need to do, the contractors understand what they need to do, and the families also understand sort of their role and how this works for them. So that's got to happen. And then thirdly, I think we need to evaluate, you know, the list of reimbursements that are provided to families and determine if there are certain reimbursements that could you know, enable us to have a better, more robust family foster home system. And so, you know, looking at the reductions that were made and some that were eliminated, and maybe even some that I don't think were ever previously considered. You know, are there things that need to be added to that list that haven't been there historically? So I would add those 2 in addition.
Thank you. Mr. Jacober.
Thank you. Just one point of clarification, so we're all on the same page and nobody leaves this room with the wrong impression. There's been 2 studies that the Arizona Association for Foster and Adoptive Parents have been a part of. Mr. Owsley addressed the one at ASU. There was one that was done a couple years prior to that as well. And I will tell you right now, so that it's perfectly clear, foster parents, the #1 concern has nothing to do with money. There are people that make decisions because of money, but the #1 concern is clear, and it's been consistent for well over half a dozen years, is that they can't care for the children in their need, that they can't care for the children's needs within the way the system is structured. It's the frustration and things you hear about. So it needs to be clear that the data's there, okay? So we don't need to hypothesize why foster parents leave. The data is perfectly clear, and if anybody wants it, the association will be happy to provide it to anybody. So we don't have to go back on that particular one. Now, I'll get off my soapbox for a second. Now, have you ever considered in your budgeting process, because you said all these things got cut. We heard at the last meeting when Casey was presenting that the difference in costs between having a child in care and having a child in a preventive situation, in-home services, was significantly less, and they documented that. Have you ever considered how you use budget dollars differently? And if you do, how do you make those decisions? So when you get allocations of dollars from the state, of how they actually get allocated?
Madam Chair, Mr. Jacober. Yes, I mean, certainly in the 9 months that I've been in this role, there's been a considerable amount of discussion about exactly what you're saying. But what I heard from you was sort of 2 opposing statements that haven't, I think, in the absence of policy decisions at a macro state level, wouldn't allow me to operate from a micro perspective. So if money is not the driver that causes people to become family foster parents or to you know, maintain their license or care for children, then adding additional money to the entire system of families has a cost to it. And if we're not going to get additional families because money is not the driver, then I'm not going to be able to get the children out of congregate care to sort of offset that cost. You know what I mean? And so there would be a level of risk that I think that we need to talk about as policymakers. But from a departmental situation, could you take on, you know, that risk, hoping that additional families would step up and take on additional children if you increase the rates in order to offset that cost? Because otherwise you just basically have an unfunded shortfall that you're going to have to deal with in some fashion by reducing services that currently exist. So, you know, that's kind of the way the discussion has gone so far. Do I think that we need to further this discussion? You know, absolutely. And I think policymakers, and I think this committee is an excellent forum to have the continuation of that discussion. And so that's kind of where it is right now, though.
Mr. Jacober.
I would actually love to have that debate. Probably not the right forum.
But I also would like to ask from a previous meeting, one of the agreements that we had, and I don't know if it filtered down from Director Carter, is that if we were going to look at data from CPS, that it would always contain the goal that you are trying to achieve. So it's nice to get the data that says here's where we are, but until we know what you're trying to achieve, what is your goal as an organization for what you're trying to do? So what percentages, how many children, et cetera, et cetera. I think every presentation that the agreement is that you were going to have everybody that came to a presentation say what is the goal for that particular metric, and if we opened up and we could talk about any of those slides. I think it's really important because the department has to have goals as to what those are. Am I clear? You're giving me a look like.
Director Carter, I don't want to start a sidebar here, but
no, I think I understand that point in a way that I didn't understand it previously. I didn't realize that we were supposed to set a presentation up by saying this is our goal and then this is how we work to the goal. If that's the way the committee wants us to proceed, then we will proceed that way. We don't in all instances have a particular numerical goal. In other words, we currently have more than 15,000 children in out-of-home care. I don't have a magic number that says I want to have 10,000, 2,000, or 0, okay? What we want to do is we want to have as many children at home as is possible. So I couldn't start a presentation off by saying I've currently got 15,000 children in out-of-home care. It is my goal to have 7,000. Okay? It is our goal to make this system efficient so that no child has got to be in a circumstance where they don't have a loving and supportive environment for the shortest time possible. That's the overall goal of the system. Safety, health, and permanency is the overall goal of the system. To be able to put specific metrics on particular elements, sometimes that works, sometimes that does not.
Can I address that?
Mr. Jacober.
Obviously, it's the decision of the two chairpersons to decide what the committee should or should not move forward with. But what I thought we all agreed to before was I think you can have a goal of 15,000 as an example, because what you then understand is why did you not get there? Because we were unable to do this, or we were unable to do that. And it's hard to reform a system in my mind until we're able to do that. So I will defer to the chairman to decide of how you're going to do that. But it makes it hard for me as an oversight committee member to actually provide any sort of feedback when I don't know what the boundaries are. And the only way you set boundaries is by declaring what your target is and then where you meet or exceed or fall short.
Madam Co-Chairs.
Director Carter.
And Joseph, I think that I know that you are exactly correct from an operations standard. Okay. What I would say to you is that if I were to come back here with a goal of, again, let's use this example of number of children in foster or in out-of-home care, it would be arbitrary without having had a chance to go through a very, very robust, not only department but community discussion about what is acceptable. So, I mean, without being able to do that, then I would just be pulling goals out of the air. Okay, I cannot. I mean, I could tell you what. If we would want to base it on what's the average number of children in out-of-home care in states that are the same size as Arizona. I mean, now we could set that as a goal, but again, without having some sort of set of what is our objective, then it's not clear to me how I would set those goals. So that's the only issue, and I'm happy to engage in a dialogue and how we do that.
And respectfully, I think we can continue on. We have, and that will be an ongoing dialogue and discussion. But then, Ms. Klitter, did you have a question?
I do. And this is for Mrs. Sotomayor. You had made a statement that you believe that the problem with communication with foster families has a lot to do with their lack of communication or not being able to reach an overworked case manager. And I would respectfully disagree with you and say that The issue is more the negative, disrespectful, often deceitful response that foster parents receive from case managers, and question what do you think could be done in a training manner to correct that situation. That is not me. I mean, I've had situations in my own foster parenting career, but any number of other foster families I have spoken with who are basically treated as second or third class citizens in that situation, which causes them to think, well, if I'm of no value to you, then why bother? You know, why go through all of this? And foster parents, believe it or not, go through a lot to care for children, a lot of scheduling stuff, a lot of disregard for their personal family and their traditions or situations from the CPS side of things. And so I'm wondering what could be done to make stronger that relationship from a training standpoint of being more considerate and respectful of the time and energy that a foster family is devoting to these children.
And Director Carter?
Yes, Madam Co-Chair, Ms. Clevenger, if I could. First of all, there is no one in our system who is trained to be disrespectful. Okay? What I do think that we could possibly do in making, and this is really off of the top of my head at this point, we'd have to figure out a way to work this through. You cannot just say that the foster parent is a member of the team. That has got to be made operational. And maybe a way to make it operational is to make the foster family part of the overall personnel review process. In other words, as I'm doing my annual review, maybe part of it is, okay, I'm also going to do a check-in with the families that you have served for them to also help me understand and make this more full of a rating. Okay, so I just don't think that, I mean, there literally nobody, there isn't a, page 7 of the manual which says treat people like dirt. It just isn't. Okay, I can certainly understand that in far too many circumstances that happens, but I think that what we have to do is structurally figure out a way that brings that family member, again, not just in word to the team, but into true operations in the team. And I commit to trying to think that through somehow.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Again, to be respectful of time, Ms. McKeon-Davis, I wanted to just say that we're going to be going until 5, and we've got and stopping, and we've got a huge big section coming up on the hotline. There needs to be about 5 to 10 minutes worth of prep to get that operational. So, and I wanted to make sure there was adequate time to address that. Ms. McKeon-Davis.
Well, Madam Chair, just very quickly, I just want to affirm what those on the panel who have had personal experience with foster care are saying. I've heard from parents who are fostering children in the system who want to have services for the children, have identified problems, and they don't get heard by the caseworkers. And I don't think it's an intent of the caseworker, and frankly, obviously the statement about training them to be unpleasant is not even, probable. But the point is they're overworked. They don't have time. They're not hearing. They're not listening. So putting somebody in their personnel review doesn't go to solving the problem either. And we do need to have insight as to how those relationships work. Because if those relationships don't work well, then the very people we bring into those children's lives to help them end up walking away. And that's another strike against those kids. And that's wrong. So whatever we do here, we need to fix that relationship, and we have to put those resources in place. That's my soapbox for the day.
Thank you. I'll bet you my betting nickel it isn't, but but I wanted to thank the representatives from DES for your testimony and for your professionalism, and I think probably the closest we got to the mark had to do with, it's hard to be nice when you're so overwhelmed you can't see through the system. And I would also like to refer back to the Children's Action Alliance forum, where the strongest, most consistent voice I heard, and I heard very many strong, consistent voices from parts of the system, had to do with foster parents wanting to be treated with respect and wanting to be partnered. I know that there are personal experiences that are brought to bear here, and I thank the DES staff, CPS staff for your professionalism and for understanding that, but that is certainly a part of the system that needs work. With that, I'm going to recess the meeting for 5 to 7 minutes, and we're going to get set up for the hotline, and any members of the committee who would like some water, or the bathrooms are that way, or that way. And thank you. We'll be back.